Stone Man syndrome. Stone Man syndrome, also known as fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva, is an extremely rare illness where a person's muscle and other connective tissues turn into bone, causing them to become permanently stiff and even start to grow new bones. It was first described by a man named Guy Patton in 1692. Guy described the condition as turned into wood. It was later renamed myositis ossificans progressiva in the 1900s and finally changed to fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva (FOP) in 1970 by Dr. Victor A. McCusick, a name that translates to abnormal fiber formation that progressively turns into bone in English. A real-life example of this is Nancy Sando. Nancy was born on May 29, 1959 in Detroit, Michigan. At age 5, Nancy became misdiagnosed with cancer when FOP began flaring in her back muscles. Luckily for her, Dr. Pack, the oncologist from New York City who examined her, noticed her toes was malformed and correctly diagnosed Nancy with FOP. From that point, doctors at the Pediatric Child Disability Clinic at Yale closely began studying Nancy and ran so many tests on her, all to understand FOP even better because it was so rare, which she even recalls feeling like a human guinea pig. At one point, doctors tried to stretch the joint in her right arm through surgery to free up the stiffness, but this caused her body to react and grew even more bone in her joint, making her arm even more stiffer and harder to move. It was at this point that the most terrifying truth about FOP became clear. Any attempt to cure or even relieve FOP would cause even more bone growth, further trapping the patient in their own body, and might accelerate several diseases, leading to severe complications and potentially death. Apparently, this is the first of the most disturbing and unsettling facts about FOP. You see, the only known cause is genetic mutation, where most people appear normal at birth but begin to show signs in their early childhood. It starts out with painful flare-ups, often when the patient gets minor injuries, and unlike normal bone growth, the bone growth in FOP patient is uncontrolled and never-ending. This means that no matter how careful someone is, their condition will continue to worsen over time, slowly restricting their movement more and more. Their arms, legs, and back first start to lose flexibility, and eventually, even basic actions like raising an arm or turning the head become impossible. As the condition worsens, the person's breathing and speaking might get affected. A formation in their rib cage eventually causes their lungs not to expand properly, making their breathing difficult. Over time, they develop respiratory complications, eventually resulting in death. This is even the leading cause of death in most cases. A formation of bones around their jaw causes them to struggle with eating and speaking. Current treatments being carried out focus on managing symptoms, avoiding injuries, and reducing inflammation. And for now, there is no definitive medical treatment to prevent, stop, or reverse this disturbing and unsettling illness. Stone Man syndrome is often described as, quote, a living prison, progressively and slowly trapping people inside their own bodies, requiring them to constantly depend on others for their daily needs and activities for the rest of their lives. Fatal familial insomnia. Fatal familial insomnia, FFI, is a rare illness where a person loses their ability to sleep forever. No matter how exhausted they become, their body simply refuses to shut down, leading to hallucinations, paranoia, and eventually death. The earliest description of the disease dates back to 1765, but was first identified and described by Lugaresi et al. In 1986. One of the most infamous cases of FFI was an Italian man named Silvano. Silvano lived a pretty healthy and normal life up until the age of 53 when he began experiencing restlessness and night sweats. Within months, he could no longer sleep at all and soon began to hallucinate, and eventually paranoia took over. After several medical interventions, nothing could force his brain into rest. Silvano knew exactly what he was going through and had even explained his fate to doctors, saying, "I'll stop sleeping, and within 8 or 9 months, I'll be dead." He knew this because many of his family members had suffered the same fate before him. He had witnessed their terrifying decline, losing sleep, slipping into hallucinations and dementia, and eventually dying within months. He later offered himself for study and was placed in a sleep lab at the University of Bologna, where researchers watched in horror as he remained fully awake for months despite being on the verge of death. Every attempt to induce sleep failed, and Silvano's condition deteriorated exactly as he had predicted, and he eventually slipped into a coma and died. An autopsy revealed massive damage to his thalamus, the part of the brain that controls sleep, confirming FFI as the cause of his death. FFI follows a terrifying and disturbing 4-stage progression, lasting anywhere from 6 to 36 months. In the first 1 to 4 months, the victim begins to experience mild sleeplessness and panic attacks. Sleep becomes increasingly difficult, but they are still able to function. Within 5 to 9 months, their sleeplessness worsens to the point where even sedatives fail. The person begins to suffer from vivid hallucinations, paranoia, and uncontrollable tremors. Within 10 to 12 months, they completely lose the ability to sleep, become unresponsive, and suffer from severe weight loss. And within 12 to 36 months, the victim's body shuts down due to organ failure, leaving them in a coma before death. As to what causes this terrifying and disturbing illness, FFI has a strong correlation with mutation in the PRNP gene, leading to the production of misfolded prion proteins in the brain. These proteins then accumulate and destroy the region of the brain responsible for sleep regulation called the thalamus. According to reports, FFI is a genetic disorder that runs in families, dooming those who inherit it to the same horrifying fate as their ancestors. Surprisingly, in rare cases, FFI has also been documented to occur randomly, even in individuals with no family history. This means that even without any trace of the illness in a person's family, they could suddenly develop it one day. However, as to what exactly triggers the mutation of the gene, we still have no clear understanding. There is currently no cure, treatments, or ways to prevent the progression of FFI once it begins. As of today, a total of 131 FFI patients worldwide, including 57 women and 72 men, have been identified and reported. 106 of these patients have passed away, and presently some of the remaining patients have dedicated their lives to finding a cure. Hopefully, they find a solution soon. ONDINE'S curse. ONDINE'S curse, also known as central hypoventilation syndrome (CHS), is a rare and fatal illness where a person forgets to breathe when they fall asleep. This condition was first discovered in 1962 by John W. Severinghaus and Gordon A. Mitchell, who observed it in 3 patients after they underwent brain surgery. Its name is a reference to a 1938 play by Jean Giraudoux dating back to 1811. In the story, a water nymph who fell in love with a mortal man cursed him when he betrayed her. According to the legend, he would only continue breathing as long as he remained awake, but the moment he fell asleep, he would stop breathing. This chilling myth is exactly the terrifying reality faced by a person with CHS, where they must either wake up constantly or suffocate in their sleep. But in reality, to understand why a person would forget to breathe when they fall asleep, we need to first understand how breathing works. A person can breathe either voluntarily or involuntarily. In the case of involuntary breathing, which happens both during unconscious and conscious moments, a person does not actively need to think about breathing because a part of the brain called the brainstem controls it automatically. However, when that part becomes affected, the brain notices and has to fall back on its higher intelligence to consciously and voluntarily carry out the breathing process. But it can only continue this while awake. This means deep breaths and controlled breathing can only be done when awake. But due to the fact that when anyone falls asleep, they lose conscious control, and because those with CHS have an underdeveloped or impaired brainstem, the body eventually stops breathing. CHS, as a result of an underdeveloped brainstem, is mostly correlated with genetics. As you can already tell, as soon as the patient is born and starts to breathe, symptoms appear. The brain notices that the brainstem is underdeveloped and carries out breathing consciously, but they eventually fall asleep and ultimately stop breathing, turning them blue. Luckily, if revived on time, they would have to be plugged into a life support machine every time they fall asleep. Currently, CHS has no cure. For the most severe cases, doctors perform a tracheostomy. This involves making a hole in the throat and placing a tube in it. This tube is then connected to a mechanical ventilator, a machine that forces air into the lungs to keep them breathing while they sleep. However, not all CHS patients need a tracheostomy. Some have milder cases and can use non-invasive ventilation. These machines deliver pressurized air through a mask over the nose and mouth, helping them breathe without needing surgery. A more advanced and preferable solution is currently being developed by KeepMeBreathing.com. Their approach involves implanting an electric device in patients to signal their bodies to remember to breathe. Hopefully, soon enough, a more convenient solution will be developed to combat this disturbing, highly dangerous, and life-threatening condition. Progeria syndrome. Progeria syndrome, commonly known as progeria, is an extremely rare and fatal genetic disorder illness that causes a person to age 10 times faster. Victims of this condition rapidly age at a very young age, causing them to eventually experience complications typically seen in 80-year-olds. The first documented case of progeria was described by Dr. Jonathan Hutchinson in 1886 and later studied further by Dr. Hastings Gilford in 1904. That was when children who, despite their young age, displayed features typical of old age, including baldness, skeletal abnormalities, and cardiovascular diseases, were first observed. Among the most well-known cases of progeria is that of Sam Burns. Sam was born to Scott Burns and Leslie Gordon and was diagnosed with progeria before the age of 2. He later became an advocate for progeria awareness, delivering a powerful TED Talk and being featured in the HBO documentary Life According to Sam. However, as he reached his late teens, Sam's condition worsened, and sadly in 2014, at the age of 17, Sam passed away due to heart failure. As to what would cause this extremely disturbing disorder, researchers have correlated it to a spontaneous mutation in a gene responsible for producing a defective protein called progerin. This abnormal protein weakens the patient's cell structures, preventing proper cell regeneration, even for growth, and causing the body to age very fast. Unlike many genetic disorders, progeria is not inherited from parents. Instead, they occur randomly during conception, and while scientists have not identified any environmental triggers, some speculate that external factors like radiation or toxins could contribute to progeria, though there is no solid evidence. The victims usually begin to show symptoms within the first 2 years of life. At first, they appear healthy, but soon, unusual signs start appearing. Growth slows dramatically, their skin thins and wrinkles, and their joints become abnormally stiff. By the time they reach early childhood, their bodies resemble those of elderly individuals despite still being mentally sharp. What makes progeria so terrifying is that there is no cure, and nearly all victims die from heart disease or stroke before reaching adulthood, making progeria one of the rarest, most disturbing, and most heartbreaking medical conditions ever recorded. Although there is a current treatment called lonafarnib has been shown to improve symptoms and potentially extend the lifespan of patients. Researchers are actively investigating further treatment options to find a true cure, and hopefully we get one soon.